I am talking to you about the separatist movement, part of the Great Reformation, particularly in the nation of England, in the northern parts, and how powerful this was because God overspread the area and many people were getting converted. In fact, the very first thing that takes place at any massive revival is the sovereign conversion of the heart from the inside out. And here this revival of hearth and home now is spilling into the church where believers come together and gather. But the established church of England was not ready for this. They did not want to see people who were being changed from the inside out. They wanted them to be conformed, to go through the normal process that they had been used to for decades. And so there began to be this terrible persecution of these believers that began to reform their lives from the inside out. And the civil government had joined with the church, and the established church now had begun to persecute it. So what do? They begin to separate from the established church. And when they separate from the established church, they're given a nickname which is not a compliment. They're called separatists. Individuals that will not worship the way everyone else does. They begin to worship underground, illegally, in homes and in basements and in different places. In fact, they began to question with this key thought: what is a church? Is a church the building? Is a church something that's been licensed and sanctioned by the state? Or is a church something that God birthed, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in His name and they become a church? That's what they believed. And therefore, I'm going to quote to you again from William Bradford, who was the historian and the second governor of the Pilgrims by the time they reached to the shores of New England. And this is how they put it. They formed their own covenant to establish their church. They said this: "So many, therefore, of these professors as saw the evil of those things in these parts, and whose hearts the Lord had touched with heavenly zeal for His truth, they shook off this yoke of anti-Christian bondage, and as the Lord's free people joined themselves by a covenant of the Lord into a church estate in the fellowship of the gospel, to walk in all His ways made known, or to be made known unto them according to their best endeavors, whatsoever it should cost them, the Lord assisting them." This was a radical idea at the time, that a church was simply a voluntary association, a covenant with 2 or 3 individuals that gather together. This is what forms a vibrant, living church, because there's a living ligament that ties individual believers together, for we can do more together than we could ever do apart. And this was a step from conversion to covenant. Now they were beginning to walk in the ways of God. And notice what they said. They were going to walk in the ways of God together. So in other words, whatsoever should cost them. If one begins to stray, someone will lovingly speak into their life. They won't be controlled from the outside in, but be controlled from their love for one another and their desire to live out the truth of God. This principle of covenant becomes the basis of the entire movement. In fact, these people are on a journey. We're on a journey that's amazingly exciting. What's going to happen to a people that get converted? Their homes begin to change, their marriages, they're reading to their children from the Word of God for the first time in decades, in centuries, where it's in the language of the people. What's going to happen to that group of people that now join together in covenant in a church, a vibrant, living church that people relate to one another? They've separated from the state church because they're being persecuted, not allowed to freely worship. And here in basements, in sometimes manor houses, and in other places, they begin to join together. And then they begin to share what God has done in their lives. They look to the Word of God, and they begin to preach, and they begin to teach. Indeed, these people, by a covenant of God, have formed a church, and they consider themselves now the bride of Christ, who is going to birth on the earth a measure of the kingdom. This is powerful. And you need to hear more of this story. If you enjoy his story, then what you need to do is hit the subscribe button, turn on those notifications, And I'm going to tell you something about the American Pilgrimage 400 that's coming in 2020, June 28 to July 2nd. This is going to be an amazing 5-day event in Plymouth, Massachusetts, where you're going to hear history, you're going to see tours, you're going to see drama, music, and experience all kinds of a 3-dimensional event that will teach you the rest of the story, His story, of what God did in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Come and join us.